We are all made of stardust, and our stories are the light that shines through the endless dark of space. Join us for a cosmic journey through the human experience and the magic of existence. Subscribe now and stay connected to the light within us all. The manila envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I kept walking past it, glancing at it, then looking away. It was thick, the kind of thick that meant someone had put real thought into what was inside. My attorney had prepared it. Every page notarized, every number confirmed. Inside that envelope was the deed to a lake house in Vermont that I had spent 11 years paying off, in a property worth just over $900,000 today. I had planned to hand it to my son at his retirement party next Saturday. He was turning 40, stepping down from the firm he'd built. And I thought, what better moment for a father to say, "Everything I built thinking of you." I poured my second cup of coffee and looked out the window at the yard. The oak tree my wife had planted the year our son was born was enormous now. She had been gone for 9 years. I still talk to that tree sometimes. My phone buzzed on the counter. I assumed it was my neighbor Harold, who texted me weather updates like they were classified intelligence. I picked it up without looking. The number was one I didn't recognize. Local area code. But nothing saved in my contacts. The message was 4 words. Don't give him anything. I set the coffee mug down slowly. I stood there in my kitchen for a long moment, reading those 4 words again. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I told myself it was a wrong number. Someone sending a warning to someone else. A message that had landed in my phone by accident. I set the phone face down and went to get dressed, but I picked it up again before I left the kitchen. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared immediately. Whoever it was had been waiting. Someone who knows what's happening at the lake house. Call me, please. My chest did something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite fear, something older than fear. The particular dread of a man who has spent 40 years trusting his instincts in business and is now standing in his kitchen wondering if he has been a fool in his personal life. I called the number. It rang twice. Walter, the voice said. It wasn't a question. He knew exactly who he was calling. I hadn't heard that voice in 12 years. It took me several seconds to place it. The way you struggle to recognize a song from just the first note. Then it hit me low, unhurried. The slight rasp of a man who used to smoke parliaments on the back steps of the office we had shared for 8 years. "Dennis," I said. "Yeah." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Dennis Calhoun and I had built a commercial real estate company together in the 90s. We had shaken hands on a deal in 2013, and the handshake had gone sideways, a misread contract. Money that disappeared in ways neither of us could cleanly explain. Lawyers that turned a friendship into paperwork. I had not spoken to him since the day we signed the dissolution agreement. I had not spoken to him since the day I said, in a room full of attorneys, that I no longer considered him a man of his word. "Why are you calling me?" "Dennis, because," he said, and I heard him exhale slowly. "Your son called me 2 months ago." I pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. "He called you?" "He did. Said he'd heard through the grapevine that I still had contacts at the county assessor's office. Said he needed information about transferring a property title, how long it takes, what triggers a review, whether certain kinds of power of attorney documents get flagged." Dennis paused. "Walter, I want you to understand something. I didn't help him. I told him I didn't do that kind of work anymore and I hung up. But you listened long enough to understand what he was asking." "Long enough?" Dennis said. "And then last week I ran into a woman at the farmer's market in Stowe. She works for the title company that services your county. She mentioned not knowing who I was, just making conversation that she'd been seeing some unusual documentation coming through. Pre-signed transfer authorizations. The kind that get filed before the original owner is notified." He stopped. "Walter, the lake house. The property's already in motion." I sat very still. Outside, a car went by on the street. A dog barked twice and went quiet. The whole world seemed to be operating at normal speed while something inside my chest had simply stopped. "What do you mean in motion?" I said. My voice came out calm. I was surprised by that. "I mean, someone has begun the paperwork to transfer that property out of your name. They're waiting on one document, one signature they apparently already have or believe they have. I don't know the details." "Walter, I'm not in that office. But I know enough to tell you that if you hand your son that deed next Saturday, you may be completing a process you didn't know had already started." I thanked him. I'm not sure I said it with any warmth. I think I just said the word "thank you," the way you might read a line from a script correctly but distantly. Then I ended the call and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The oak tree moved slightly in the wind outside. My son's name is Garrett. He is, by any external measure, a successful man. He built a small architecture firm from nothing in his 30s. Developed a reputation for sustainable residential design. Was written up in 2 regional magazines. He has his mother's cheekbones and his mother's way of tilting his head slightly when he listens to you, so that you always feel like the most important person in the room. I had taken enormous pride in him. I still remembered standing in the driveway watching him drive away to college and thinking I did something right. His partner's name is Scott. They had been together for 6 years. I liked Scott. He was quiet, organized, had a background in finance. He handled their joint accounts, their investments. I had liked that Garrett had someone practical by his side. I sat at that table and I thought about every interaction I'd had with my son in the past 2 years. The way he had started asking, casually, about my estate planning. The conversation Thanksgiving before last when he had just mentioned, offhandedly, that the lake house was probably sitting there underutilized. That it might make more sense as a rental property managed by someone younger. The Sunday call 3 months ago when he had asked if I had ever considered a revocable living trust. Because he had a friend in estate law who could put something together. The papers I had signed, sitting in my attorney's office. That I had reviewed only partially because my son had said it's just standard boilerplate. "Dad, it protects you." I stood up from the table. I went to my filing cabinet in the second bedroom, the room that used to be Garrett's when he came home from college. That I now used as a home office. I pulled the drawer open and started going through folders. I found the documents from the meeting with the estate attorney, the one my son had arranged, with an attorney he had recommended, a man I had met once, and whose card I had kept in the folder. I sat down on the floor of that room with the papers in my lap and I read every page. The language was careful. It was the kind of careful that looks like protection on one reading and looks like a transfer mechanism on another. There was a clause in the third document, page 7, subsection 4, that I had initialed without understanding. It authorized a designated agent to act on my behalf in property transactions for the purposes of estate planning in the event that I was traveling or otherwise unavailable for signature. The designated agent was Scott. I stayed on the floor of that room for a long time. I have been in real estate for most of my adult life. I have read thousands of contracts. I have walked away from deals that other men thought were airtight because something in the language felt wrong to me. I had handed my own son an opening to use every skill I had spent 40 years building. And I had done it because I loved him, because I trusted him, because I looked at his face and saw his mother's cheekbones and I thought, I know this person. I called my own attorney, not the one my son had recommended. Mine. A woman named Patricia, who had handled my contracts since 1999, and who had the kind of voice that made you feel like someone was actually paying attention. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment. "Walter," she said, "I need you to not do anything with that deed. Don't hand it over. Don't file it. Don't put it anywhere new. Can you bring me the full packet of documents Monday morning? I can bring them today." I said, "Then bring them today." I put on my coat. I picked up the manila envelope from the kitchen counter, the one I had meant to give my son at his party. The one that felt so significant 3 days ago when I had placed it there with such anticipation, and I put it in my briefcase along with the estate documents. I took one look around my kitchen. the coffee mug still sitting where I'd left it, the oak tree through the window, barely moving now. I drove to Patricia's office. She spent 2 hours reviewing everything. She brought in her paralegal, Prude. She made several calls. At one point, she stepped out of the office and spoke in low tones in the hallway. And when she came back, she set a legal pad in front of me and said, "Here's where we are." The subsection 4 clause was real and binding, but only if the property were already in a trust that named Scott as agent. That trust had been filed. She confirmed. 3 weeks earlier. Using a version of my signature that I had provided on the boilerplate authorization page, the page that, in the original document, had been blank below my signature. Something had been filled in afterward. "That's forgery," I said. "It may be," Patricia said carefully. "What I can tell you with confidence is that the trust document as filed does not match what you signed. The transfer of the lake house, if it proceeds, would be challengeable. But challengeable takes time and money and stress. Walter, the cleaner solution is to get ahead of it." We spent the next hour doing exactly that. Patricia filed a revocation of the trust document, citing the discrepancy. She contacted the title company, the same one Dennis's farmer's market acquaintance worked for, and placed a hold on any pending transfer of the Vermont property. She drafted a new power of attorney that named my nephew Kevin, a man who had never asked me for anything except advice on his vegetable garden. I sat in her office and felt something that I could not immediately name. It wasn't anger. Exactly. It was something more like the particular exhaustion of a man who realizes he has been carrying something heavy for a long time without knowing it, and has now finally set it down. But his arms are still shaking from the weight. I called Garrett that evening. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, and said, "Hey, Dad, all set for Saturday. I need to talk to you." I said, "Not Saturday. Now." A pause. Something shifted in the quality of the silence. "Okay," he said. "What's going on?" "I know about the trust document." I said, "I know about the clause naming Scott as agent. I know the transfer was already in motion before I had any intention of giving you anything." I paused. "I know you called Dennis Calhoun." The silence this time was different. Longer. The kind of silence that is not a man thinking about what to say, but a man deciding whether there is any version of the truth that still works. "Dad, I don't want explanations tonight." "Garrett," I said, "I want you to understand that the hold has been filed. The trust has been revoked. And Patricia is handling everything going forward. The lake house will not be transferred. You're not being fair," he said. And his voice had changed. "I was trying to protect you. Estate taxes, probate costs. You have no idea how much of what you've built would disappear if you died without a proper structure in place. I was doing this for you. I had spent 63 years on this earth. I had buried my wife. I had built and lost and rebuilt. I had sat across from men in negotiating rooms who said, 'I'm doing this for you.' And I had learned to hear what those words actually meant. I understand what you're telling me." I said, "I don't believe it." I ended the call. I want to be precise about what happened next. Because I think the precise details matter. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark of my bedroom and I did what any father does, which is go back through 20 years of decisions and look at each one differently in the new light. I thought about the baseball games I had missed, the graduations I had attended with one eye on my phone, the years when the company was growing, and I told myself my son understood, because I was building something for him, because everything I was doing was for him. I thought about whether there was a version of what Garrett had done that was partly my fault, whether I had raised a man who believed that the only way to get something from me was to maneuver around me. Because I had never been someone who could simply be asked. I didn't have clean answers. I don't think clean answers exist. In the morning, I drove to the county assessor's office myself and confirmed that the hold had processed. On the way home, I stopped at the diner on Elm Street where I used to take Garrett on Saturday mornings when he was 7. And I ordered the same thing. I always ordered and I sat in the corner booth and ate my eggs and read the newspaper. A couple came in with a small boy who was fascinated by the napkin dispenser. I watched him for a while. I called Dennis when I got home. "It's handled," I told him. "Good," he said. "I owe you an apology." I said, "For tutusene atraten." I said things in that room that weren't entirely fair. There was a pause. I wasn't entirely clean in 2013 either. "Walter." "No," I said, "but I was the one who said you weren't a man of your word. And the fact that you called me, you didn't have to do that. You could have let it happen and I'd have never known the difference. We spent 8 years in business together." Dennis said, "You came to my daughter's graduation. You sent flowers when my mother died." Another pause. Some things don't stop mattering just because lawyers got involved. I had the lake house listed with a rental management company the following week. The income goes into an account I control entirely. I have updated my estate documents with Patricia, named Kevin as my agent, and set up a structure that is clean and transparent and does not rely on any goodwill. I cannot verify. The manila envelope is still in my filing cabinet. I never opened it after the day I brought it to Patricia's office. I should probably deal with it. I keep not quite getting around to it. Garrett and I have not spoken since that phone call. I don't know if we will. I know that I love him in the way a father loves a son, not because the son has earned it or maintained it or proved it deserves to continue, but because that love was established before Garrett was old enough to do anything right or wrong. And that kind of love doesn't simply switch off. It just becomes something you carry differently. Heavier in some ways, lighter in others. I think about something my wife used to say when Garrett was a teenager and going through a difficult stretch, doing what teenage boys do, pushing, testing, taking more than he gave. She would sit at the kitchen table with her tea and she'd say, "We didn't raise him to need us. We raised him to not need us. That's the whole point." And then she would smile, like the paradox genuinely delighted her. I understood what she meant then. I think I understand it more completely now. The lake house in Vermont is beautiful in October. I've decided to spend 2 weeks there this fall. I'll take my fishing gear and some books and probably call Harold about the weather, even though Harold only knows what's happening in our zip code and Vermont is a different world entirely. I might call Dennis and see if he wants to drive up for a weekend. We have 12 years of bad feeling to navigate. And maybe we can't, but I find that at 63 I have less patience for leaving things unresolved simply because the conversation would be uncomfortable. The oak tree in the backyard is going to need trimming before winter. I've been putting it off because there's something about watching someone cut back a tree that has always felt like a small loss, even when you know the tree is better for it. I'll call someone this week. Some things I have learned you cannot afford to keep putting off.